possible? First of all, again, as I said, it's not all despair and disillusion, as I started out with. The 1990s did see a return to the discourse of constitutionalism. It did see, and what did make possible, the return to elected government made possible, the growth of independent rights organizations and the operation of activist lawyers who could engage in social activism, not just in a one-point movement for restoration of democracy demand, which we had all been embedded in throughout the period up until the 1990s. It also led that period to judicial activism, with the entry of judges, at that point at least, with a commitment to pluralism, many with a background or engagement with legal aid or political legal work, pro bono legal work and social activism. And very importantly, the early 90s saw the development of the notion of public interest litigation or social action litigation, followed in Pakistan by a few years and in India by about a decade or so. Perhaps the most critical, I think, of all of the institutional developments that we saw in the early 90s was the growth of an engaged and active media, and a very independent and very vociferous media. And through all of these processes, I think we also saw an emerging political commitment from bottom up to an understanding of pluralism, up to a point of ethnic and linguistic pluralism, but also, I think very importantly, to the articulation of more marginalized voices, to the articulation of organizations of Adivasis, for example, of indigenous peoples, of people with disabilities, more recently and more quietly true also of sexual minorities, in the last 5 to 10 years of Dalits, now sex workers, all kinds of organizations, all kinds of voices, all kinds of people that it would have been simply unimaginable for us to think about as having any voice in the political narrative prior to 1990. And in a sense, these narratives, I think, link back to the grander national narrative, the history of the struggles for liberation. When we talk about that in the grand political narrative, it is always the liberation of the nation, the liberation of the Bengali nation. These days, sadly, the liberation of the Bengali Muslim nation again. It's about the language movements. It's about cultural assertions of, I think what Dina was saying again, the Bengali Muslims. But the emergence of these voices and these organizations allowed this to be critiqued, interrogated, and transformed in many ways. So what were some of the achievements of these changes? The use of constitutional rights and the interpretation of constitutional rights, as happened again in India and Pakistan, to establish, I think, new understandings. So, for example, the use of the right to life, not only to challenge, in recent years, not very successfully, I have to say, up till now, but to challenge extrajudicial executions by paramilitary forces, but also, very importantly and more successfully, the use of the right to life, to argue for basic economic and social rights, to use the courts and to use constitutional rights as a shield. As I said, we're less effective in using them as a sword, I think, but we are able to use them as a shield against, for example, mass displacements or forced evictions of huge slums and shanty towns. We've been able to use also constitutional rights and public interest processes to secure the rights of minorities. At the height of, I think, the BNP Jamaat coalition in the sort of, one of the depths, I should say, not the height, in the early 90s, when there were massive attacks against NGOs and secular voices and sort of anyone really who dissented from orthodox voices, as well as massive development organizations, including BRAC and Grameen, who faced their offices being burnt down and women involved in their organizations facing physical attack and so on. At that time, another set of attacks, also a Pakistani import, I'm sorry to say, was a very sustained set of attacks, was launched on the Ahmadi community in Bangladesh. And again, our courts stepped up and they prevented, they allowed a challenge to a ban on Ahmadi publications. They allowed other interventions to protect Ahmadi communities from violation and attack. More interestingly, not more interestingly, but in a further development rather, in the recent 5 years, we've also seen issues regarding gender equality, I think, being asserted again in a more robust fashion. Some of the cases that have come up, for example, that we've also had an opportunity of being involved in, are cases on one which has run actually for a long time. Perhaps I should mention that first, and it's the well-known case around fatwas and so so-called fatwa violence. I think you need to put on record that it's kind of a huge misnomer in the first place, this whole notion of fatwa violence. I mean, as many of you will know, the issue is of village tribunals, basically not even tribunals, bodies of village elders taking on issues that are brought to them for resolution.